She was 28 years old when the doctor spoke the words that shattered her world. "You'll never walk again." But 3 months later, she took her first step. Not because of a miracle drug, not because of experimental surgery, but because of a single father who looked at her tears and made a promise that changed everything. This is the story of Emma Chen and Marcus Wade, and the unshakable bond that defied every medical expert in the room. The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Hospital hummed their familiar tune as Emma Chen stared at the ceiling tiles she'd memorized over the past 6 weeks. She could recite the pattern of water stains like a map, knew which tiles had 43 holes in their acoustic surface and which had 45. These were the useless details her mind clung to while the rest of her life crumbled around her. The accident had happened on a Tuesday. Emma remembered because she'd been running late for her weekly volunteer session at the Children's Art Therapy Center, the one place that made her marketing job feel bearable. A distracted driver, a red light, 3 seconds that rewrote her entire existence. The impact had compressed her T11 and T12 vertebrae, and despite 2 surgeries, the damage to her spinal cord was catastrophic. Dr. Patricia Morrison had kind eyes, but her words were clinical, measured, carefully chosen to be truthful without being cruel. "The inflammation has subsided, and we've done everything we can surgically. But Emma, you need to understand the reality. The neural pathways are severely compromised. We're looking at permanent paralysis from the waist down. I'm so sorry." Emma's mother had sobbed. Her father had left the room, unable to watch his daughter's face crumble. But Emma had just nodded, feeling nothing. Not because she was brave, but because her mind simply refused to process it. 28 years old. Her whole life had been about movement. She'd been a dancer in college, still taught Zumba on weekends. She hiked. She ran 5Ks for charity. Her body was her instrument, and now someone had smashed it beyond repair. The physical therapy sessions felt like cosmic jokes. Her therapist, an eternally optimistic woman named Jen, would guide her through exercises designed to maintain muscle mass and prevent complications, all while pretending there was hope. "You never know what the body can do," Jen would say cheerfully. But Emma knew. Everyone knew. This was maintenance, not recovery. This was learning to exist in a wheelchair, not learning to walk again. That's when Marcus Wade entered her life, though she didn't know his name yet. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and Emma was in the physical therapy room, tears streaming down her face as she struggled with a simple transfer from wheelchair to mat. Her arms shook with effort and frustration. She was exhausted, not just physically, but existentially. Every movement was a reminder of everything she'd lost. "You're putting too much weight on your left side." The voice came from across the room, where a man sat in a wheelchair of his own, watching a little girl, maybe 7 years old, work with one of the other therapists. Emma looked up, irritated. "Excuse me?" He wheeled closer. He was maybe 35, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples, and eyes that seemed to carry their own weather system. "Your left arm, you're compensating because your right is weaker. But if you distribute the weight evenly, engage your core, it's easier, trust me." "I don't need advice," Emma snapped, immediately regretting her tone. This stranger didn't deserve her anger, but he just smiled, understanding rather than offended. "I didn't either. 2 years ago, I would have bitten your head off for saying what I just said. I'm Marcus, by the way. That's my daughter, Sophie." He gestured to the little girl who was laughing as she practiced walking between parallel bars, her legs thin and unsteady in their braces. Emma watched the child, seeing a joy that seemed impossible given the circumstances. What happened to her? Spinal muscular atrophy. Diagnosed at 3. Doctors said she'd never walk, never have a normal life. Marcus's voice carried the weight of 1,000 battles fought. But Sophie decided doctors don't know everything. Over the following weeks, Emma found herself looking for Marcus and Sophie during therapy sessions. She learned that Marcus was a software engineer who designed his own adaptive equipment, that he'd been widowed when Sophie was 2, losing his wife to cancer just months before Sophie's diagnosis. that he'd quit his high-paying corporate job to focus full-time on Sophie's care and had built a successful freelance career from home. "Don't you ever get tired?" Emma asked him one day as they sat side by side, both catching their breath after particularly grueling sessions. Marcus looked at Sophie, who was attempting to stack blocks with the occupational therapist. "Every single day. I get tired of fighting insurance companies, tired of researching treatments, tired of watching my daughter work 3 times as hard as other kids just to do basic things. But then she laughs, or she shows me a picture she drew, or she makes progress nobody thought possible, and I remember why I keep going." "But what if the progress stops? What if this is as good as it gets?" Emma's voice cracked. This was the question that haunted her at 3 in the morning. Marcus turned his wheelchair to face her directly. "Then we make as good as it gets extraordinary." "Emma, I've learned something these past few years. Life isn't about the body you're given. It's about what you do with it. Sophie will probably never run a marathon, but she tells stories that make people cry with laughter. She paints pictures that are hanging in the children's hospital upstairs. She makes every person she meets feel seen. That's her superpower. What's yours?" Emma didn't have an answer. She'd defined herself by her physical abilities for so long that she didn't know who she was without them. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after meeting Marcus. Emma was alone in the therapy room, attempting an exercise Jen had assigned. Without thinking, purely out of frustration, she pressed down hard with her hands and felt something. A tiny flutter in her left thigh. So faint she thought she'd imagined it. She tried again, nothing. Again, nothing. And then, there it was. Unmistakable. A sensation. Not movement, but feeling. Something the doctors had said was impossible. Emma started crying, huge gasping sobs that brought Jen running. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "I felt something," Emma whispered. "In my leg." "I felt it." Dr. Morrison was skeptical. Phantom sensations were common in spinal cord injury patients, the brain creating false signals in an attempt to make sense of the new reality. But she ordered new imaging anyway, humoring Emma's hope. The MRI revealed something unexpected. The swelling that had masked the true extent of the damage had finally resolved completely, and there was a partial preservation of nerve pathways that hadn't been visible before. Not much, but maybe, possibly, potentially enough for some sensation. Maybe even minimal motor function with intensive therapy. "I want to be very clear," Dr. Morrison said carefully. "This doesn't mean you'll walk again. At most, we're talking about possibly regaining some feeling, maybe some limited movement in the upper legs. You'll still need a wheelchair for mobility. Please don't build your hopes on a miracle that isn't coming." But Emma's hope, once kindled, was a wildfire. She attacked physical therapy with renewed ferocity. She worked with Jen 3 times a day instead of once. She researched every therapy, every technique, every experimental treatment. She pushed herself until Marcus physically pulled her away from the equipment. "Emma, stop." His voice was firm, almost angry. "You're going to hurt yourself." "You don't understand. I can get better. I can fix this. You can destroy yourself trying to be who you were before." Marcus's eyes were fierce. "I've watched you for weeks now. You're not doing therapy. You're punishing yourself for being injured. You're trying to earn back your worth by forcing your body to perform. That's not healing. That's torture." Emma felt like he'd slapped her. "How dare you? You told me to keep fighting. You said—" "I said make your life extraordinary. I didn't say break yourself trying to resurrect the person who died in that accident." His voice softened. "Emma, you keep talking about getting better like better means erasing this. But that woman who danced and ran? She's gone. And I'm sorry, but no amount of therapy will bring her back. The question is, who are you going to become now?" She wanted to hate him for saying it, but deep down, she knew he was right. She'd been so focused on returning to her old life that she hadn't considered building a new one. The shift was subtle at first. Emma started accepting help instead of fighting it. She decorated her wheelchair with Sophie's artwork instead of viewing it as a temporary sentence. She began attending the hospital's support group, something she'd refused before. And slowly, painfully, she started to grieve the life she'd lost instead of denying it was gone. But the physical therapy continued, now with a different mindset. Not to fix herself, but to discover what her body could do. And her body, it turned out, had surprises left. 3 months after the accident, Emma was in the parallel bars with Jen spotting her. It was supposed to be a standing exercise using her arms to support her weight. But as she pushed up, something fired. A signal from her brain made it all the way down to her left quadriceps. Her knee trembled, bent, extended. Jen gasped, "Emma, did you—" "I moved it." Emma stared at her leg like it belonged to someone else. "I moved it." Marcus was there, having just arrived with Sophie. He wheeled over quickly. "Show me." Emma tried again. The movement was tiny, barely a twitch, but it was voluntary. It was real. Sophie clapped her hands. "You're doing it, just like me." Over the next 6 weeks, Emma worked with a neurological physical therapist who specialized in spinal cord injury recovery. The progress was agonizingly slow. Some days she could bend her knee an inch, other days nothing. The doctors cautioned that even if she regained some motor function, walking might never be practical or functional. The wheelchair would remain her primary mobility device. But Emma was learning that progress wasn't linear, wasn't predictable, and wasn't the point. The point was living fully in whatever body she had, on whatever day she had it. Marcus became her anchor through this time. He taught her how to advocate with insurance companies, how to find joy in small victories, how to build a life that wasn't defined by limitations. And somewhere in those months of parallel recovery, of watching each other fight and fail and try again, they fell in love. It happened quietly, without fanfare. One evening, Marcus was at Emma's apartment helping install grab bars in her bathroom. Sophie was asleep on the couch, exhausted from her own therapy. Emma and Marcus sat on the floor eating cold pizza, and Marcus said, "I think I'm falling for you. Actually, I know I am. And I don't know if that's okay or if it's too complicated or if—" Emma kissed him. It was awkward, given the angles and the wheelchairs, but it was perfect. "I'll be your legs," Marcus whispered against her mouth. "Whenever you need me, I'll be your legs." "And I'll be yours," Emma whispered back, knowing he understood she didn't mean it literally. The day Emma took her first step was unremarkable in every way except one. It was a Tuesday, exactly 6 months after the accident. She was in physical therapy, working between the parallel bars as usual. Marcus was there with Sophie, both cheering her on. The bars supported 90% of her weight. Her legs trembled with effort. Every muscle screamed. And then she moved her right foot forward. 6 inches. 1 step. Her left foot followed, shaking so badly it barely cleared the ground. Another step. 3 total before her legs gave out and Jen caught her. The room erupted. Jen was crying. Sophie was shrieking with joy. The other patients and therapists were applauding. But Emma looked at Marcus, saw tears streaming down his face, and knew this moment wasn't about defying the doctors or proving anything to anyone. It was about refusing to let tragedy write the final chapter. Emma would use the wheelchair more often than not. Walking was exhausting, impractical for distances, and some days impossible. But she could stand to cook at the counter. She could take a few steps to play with Sophie. She could dance after a fashion, swaying with Marcus in the living room while Sophie giggled at them. 6 months later, Emma married Marcus in a garden ceremony where Sophie was the flower girl. Emma walked down the aisle, Marcus on one side and her father on the other, taking it one slow step at a time. But for the first dance, she stayed in her wheelchair, and Marcus knelt beside her, and they swayed together while Sophie narrated the whole thing with running commentary that had everyone laughing through their tears. Emma returned to the Children's Art Therapy Center, not as a volunteer but as a program director, creating spaces where kids like Sophie could express themselves freely. She became an advocate for adaptive sports, teaching wheelchair dance classes. She learned that her body's value wasn't in its ability to move a certain way, but in its capacity to experience joy, to love, to persist. On the anniversary of the accident, Emma sat with Marcus and Sophie at the park, Sophie was attempting cartwheels in the grass, her braces long abandoned for this particular adventure. Marcus held Emma's hand. "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" he asked quietly. Emma watched Sophie collapse in a giggling heap, then look up at the clouds. She thought about the Emma who'd existed before the accident, driven, independent, defined by constant motion. She thought about who she'd become, softer, stronger, rooted in connection rather than independence. "I wish I hadn't had to hurt so much to get here," she said honestly. "But no, I don't wish away this life. This beautiful, complicated, imperfect life." Marcus kissed her temple. "Me neither." Sophie ran over, grass-stained and breathless. "Mama Emma, will you help me make a painting when we get home?" Emma's heart swelled. Sophie had started calling her that last month, shy and hopeful. "Of course, sweet girl. What do you want to paint?" "A family," Sophie said simply. "Our family." And Emma realized that she'd spent so much time mourning what she'd lost that she almost missed what she'd gained. She'd lost the ability to run, but gained a daughter who ran to her with open arms. She'd lost her independence, but gained a partner who saw her strength even when she couldn't. She'd lost the life she'd planned, but found one infinitely richer than anything she could have imagined. That night, as Emma transferred from wheelchair to bed, Marcus helping with the logistics they'd perfected over months of practice, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her legs were thinner than they'd been, marked with surgical scars. Her arms were stronger, her eyes were different, carrying depths they hadn't had before. "I see you," Marcus said, following her gaze. "All of you. And you're beautiful." Emma believed him. Not because the scars were beautiful, or the wheelchair was beautiful, or the struggle was beautiful, but because she was still here, still growing, still becoming. The doctors had told her she'd be in a wheelchair forever, and they were mostly right, but they'd missed the most important part. She wasn't defined by the chair or by what her legs could or couldn't do. She was defined by her choice to keep living, keep loving, keep becoming whoever she was meant to be next. Marcus had promised to be her legs. But in the end, she learned she didn't need anyone to be her legs. She just needed people who would walk beside her, however that walk looked, wherever it led. And that made all the difference.